Okay. Salutations, everyone. I am Riley Arlick, and today we're going over some tabletop tips. Yes, another stream about all sorts of the board games and tabletop games that people like to play these days. I have a few tips that I hope will be particularly useful for newbies. Anybody who has yet to go into a game store or has been curious about Dungeons and Dragons or Warhammer or any of those kinds of things. I think there's a selection of basic pieces of advice that I think I can give to maybe increase the confidence of people out there or give people a good starting point so that they know what to look for. I don't want this to be too long of a stream, but what I will say is that if you have any... Oh, let me turn down the music. Oh my goodness. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'll be happy to answer them as we go. Just making sure if people can hear me okay, if you can give me a sign or something along those lines. Just let me know. Otherwise, I'm just going to charge right ahead. So let me float a little over this way. Up and down we go. And we are going to pull out ye olde PowerPoint. I put things together in this sort of format so that you guys can hopefully read it and we can just follow along in a nice, easy manner. So we're going to be talking about 5 different topics. Boom, boom, boom. The different kinds of game stores that you might find, the different kinds of games that are out there, the different kinds of groups that you can interact with, your creative priority. I really want to explain more about that when we get to it. And of course, your first purchases if you decide to dive into this nerdery with all of us. So right off the bat, we're going to talk about the stores out there. And for some reason, I doubled up on that last one. That's okay. Okay. I had all of this time to prepare this, and I blitzed through and put these slides together, and only now do I notice the mistakes. Wonderful. Oh, no, I know why. I know why. Hold on. Wait a minute. Oh, God. No? Hold on. Yes, that should be correct. Okay, well, let's continue. So the different kinds of game stores that are out there that will sell a lot of these different kinds of products, right? That's what we're talking about right now. You'll primarily be able to find them if you use Google Maps or whatever your local map finding program or oracle may be. But if you search something like comic shops or board game stores or card game stores or just game stores, you'll have a pretty easy idea of what's around you, if there's anything around you. Unfortunately, there are some cities and towns out there with not a great selection of these sorts of facilities or these sorts of shops. But don't lose faith, because you may be able to find some other places or options for playing these games, and I'll explain some of those later. The one risk is that if you type in game stores, you'll likely get something like GameStop or Best Buy or something like that. And those are great for video games, but you're unlikely to find anything role-playing related. You can, however, find some things at many bookstores as well. Bookstores are great for finding some of the core rule books, but maybe a few other items, and I'll be going over those in the purchases section. But these are the game stores that you'll be looking for. Comic shops, of course. They'll usually sell all your comics, including having subscription options for the various comics you may want to get regularly. Board game stores will have their shelves packed high with different kinds of board games, not only tabletop games, but also things like, beyond Monopoly, right? So Monopoly and Twister and games like that, I think you can find at just about any supermarket. But we're talking about Cards Against Humanity, for example, or less common games like, I believe, Call of Cthulhu is a popular one. And I have all of these games on my mind, and all of them are fleeing from me as I speak. But anyway, so lots of different board games, deck building games, things that you have pieces and dice, and you build out a board and you play something upon your table. Card game stores, of course, will have a variety of things, not to be confused with poker shops or gambling stores or anything like that. We're talking about card games like Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Magic the Gathering, any of those card games. There will sometimes be shops dedicated to those, and they'll often have other things on the side as well. And Warhammer stores, which I accidentally posted here twice, of course will focus primarily on Games Workshop products, right? It's an easy thing to search for, however, and many Warhammer store employees will be kind of plugged into the local community as well. They'll have an idea of where you can find other stores if for some reason your location you're having a hard time finding what you're looking for. So if worst case scenario, give your Warhammer store a call if you have one in your town, and you can ask them real quick, hey, do you have this game or that game, or do you know any place where I can play those games? That would be a good place to start. Poor Warhammer store employees, I know I'm kind of throwing them the challenge on this, but hopefully they'll understand. So these are the different kinds of game stores that you can look for, right? Let's talk about the different kinds of games that I'm typically going to be talking about here. There's 3 major ones. We're not going to be talking about board games so much. That's a whole other category, and there's a great number of board games out there that you can get into. But we're talking mainly about card games, tabletop role-playing games, and war games. War games usually have miniatures of some sort, and a lot of them, and will follow a turn-by-turn strategy of some sort, turn-by-turn playstyle, where you move your units, you roll dice, and back and forth. Tabletop RPGs, I think, are the most common of tabletop games that people think about when they think about nerds. Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, and even things like Starfinder now. Other games include... Oh my goodness. There's Deathwatch, there's Only War, a couple of other Warhammer-based ones, and there are some other, even modern-based games. Oh my goodness, and once again, I really should have put notes together. But many, many different kinds of tabletop role-playing games, and that's what we're going to be focusing on here. So, let's kind of run down a few of those, right? The ones that come to mind immediately are that I have the most experience in are Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder, where you play as a character, you cooperate with other characters, other players, and you live in a world designed by the game master or dungeon master, right? Or your character goes through this world facing challenges, fighting foes, solving puzzles, diving into dungeons, and so on and so forth to get to some sort of goal or just to tell a story. Whereas miniature games such as Warhammer 40k, Age of Sigmar, X-Wing, Armada, those are Star Wars games, Legion as well is another Star Wars game. Those are games where it's less about telling a story and more about playing a much more in-depth war game, where it's your units versus your opponents. It's typically not one character versus another, it's usually several units of models, whether those are platoons or squads or tanks or planes, all on the board, sometimes at the same time, sometimes at different times, but generally facing one another in some form of combat. Card games, I'll just touching on briefly because most of these places, the stores that we went over, will also be host to other kinds of card games. For example, Magic the Gathering events, whether it's a pre-release or a draft or a tournament or something like that, you will see these players very, very often at all of these kinds of stores. So, then we're going to quickly go over the different kinds of groups. Well, maybe not quickly. I would actually like to spend a little bit more time on this. This is where I'd like to slow down a little bit. Okay? Because here's where the advice is really, the wisdom that I have, I think is really going to come into play. There are going to be different types of players that you can interact with on a day-to-day basis at these various stores, at these various events, through various Discord channels, Reddit pages, Twitter groups, or whatever. There is nothing wrong with any of them. That's the first thing that I want to say. There's nothing wrong with any sort of play style that you may have, or your opponent may have, or your friend may have. All of these are completely valid. I really want to stress that because too often in many of these communities, people can become split up between these different groups, and they start to look down on each other for whatever reason. And that's not the kind of environment that I would like to promote when it comes to people getting into these different hobbies, right? I want people to get along. I want people to understand their differences, understand that these different kinds of gamers are different, and that's okay. The key is to find people that you get along with, whether they're your friends or whether they're new people that you've met at the game store or whatever. So, casual role players are usually those types of people that care more about the character that they have and the friends that they want to hang out with, okay? They enjoy playing the game, but they don't maybe know all of the ins and outs of the game. They may not know every single in-depth rule. They may not know every single competitive twist or every broken combo or something like that. They enjoy the experience as a whole. From rolling the dice to playing as your character to interacting with your friends to solve puzzles. That's what casual role players typically are about. That's kind of the baseline. I think most people are casual role players. I think that especially when they first get into a game, this is where they begin. They start off as these casual role players, and then as they learn more, they might delve into the other kinds of gamers or into the other kinds of groups, depending on their own priorities or what they want out of the game. So, speaking of, we come next to competitive gamers. Competitive gamers are the ones you'll find at tournaments. They're the ones that will follow the meta, and by meta I mean the patterns of power. The patterns of power, yes. Patterns of power that they will study in order to make sure that everything that they do, every choice that they make, is going to lead them to greater power and a greater chance of defeating their foe. Whether that's a friendly opponent at a gaming store, or whether it's an opponent at a tournament, or a particular monster within a role-playing game. That's what these competitive gamers focus on. Some people will call them power gamers. Some people will call them WAC gamers, WAAC, win at all cost gamers. And those are derogatory terms, first of all. Let's understand that. Power gaming, I get, is maybe not as bad, but WAC gamers, win at all cost gamers, that is a derogatory term, and I would really encourage people to stop using it. Because while competitive gamers certainly want to win, I don't think that many competitive gamers want to win at all costs. And I think people consider the all costs as screw friends, I don't care about making allies, I just want to win, everything else be darned. And that's not really fair. That's not really fair. There is a great level of strategy, mathematics, knowledge, and just an amazing amount of skill that goes into competing in especially tabletop war games. You need to know every in and out. You need to be aware of the tricks that your opponent may use against you. You need to be aware of your own strengths, your own weaknesses, personally and on the table, in order to come out on top in some of these games, especially in a tournament setting. And I think that's admirable. Okay, there's nothing wrong with being a competitive gamer. If you wish to compete, if you wish to hone your skill and learn the ins and outs and focus on developing your character, your wargaming army to be the best that it can be, then there are many, many resources out there to lean in that direction. The one thing I will say, however, is that the competitive gaming scene is always changing. Much like a video game, there will be patches that will come out as updates to an edition or updates to rules, and those patches will completely change the way that a game is played. That's really important to understand as you get into this, okay? There will be updates. Your experience may change as you go along and as the game evolves. As other players will learn new tricks and share those tricks, the game fundamentally will change as a direct result. So the same method that you use to win one game may be completely different a month or 6 months or 2 years from now, and that's okay. Part of the fun of being a competitive gamer is being aware of those changes as you go along. So, Now that I've mentioned those sorts of things, we can talk about the storytellers. Storytellers are those people that really love to delve into, instead of the ins and outs of the game, the ins and outs of their character. The things that make their character tick, or that are defining to their army from a visual or story or lore aspect. Storytellers enjoy telling a story, whether it's on the tabletop or in a chat room, or with the actions and behavior of their characters through roleplay or prologue or epilogue or whatever you call it. Monologue sometimes as well. Many storytellers make great game masters or dungeon masters as well. They can build incredible worlds, develop lots of different characters to act as NPCs, and they do a great job at spinning these different tales together, especially when their players are arrayed around them, to connect all of the different threads of that their players have created to create a cohesive story. I really admire people that can tell a good story, that can bring their characters along, their players along in this story, and teach them everything there is to know. I think it's really, really cool to follow a good story, and it's also a challenge to create a good story. I think that many people, especially when they first get into role-playing games or tabletop role-playing games or war games, will often, I think, focus a little bit too much on themselves, actually, and their own characters, where it's just as important to develop a story that roots your character into the world around it. Okay, so those are storytellers. Storytellers that the experienced storytellers will not only be able to tell you a great story about their character, but great stories about other characters that their character has interacted with, or challenges that their character has faced. Welcome, Jair. So storytellers are like the ones who make an entire biography and world for his character. Absolutely, absolutely. And that's a fantastic thing. The challenge with storytellers is that, like I said, sometimes they get stuck in their own head with their own story. And criticism can come across as insult to them. They get very protective over the stories that they've created. And as an artist, I've learned the wisdom of no line is sacred, right? When I'm drawing, no line is sacred. So I can erase a line, I can redraw it, whatever it takes in order to get the drawing where I want it to be. That's the same thing with stories, in my mind. No single piece of your character's biography should be considered as sacred. I understand that certainly you'll want to follow certain themes, you'll want to make your character behave a certain way in certain situations, but being a little bit more adaptable is going to go a lot farther, especially when making friends with other storytellers or making friends with other kinds of gamers. Being flexible, not being so, immovable when it comes to your own story can help a lot. And just to kind of give you a heads up, I say this because storytellers that you interact with will be very, very eager to tell you their story, but sometimes not so eager to listen to your story. So just kind of keep that in mind. It's a thing. It's a challenge that we go through. I'm not trying to bash on storytellers because, again, it's an amazing skill to spin a story and to create something interesting, and everyone needs practice on that. So, moving on, we come to the door smashers, also known as the dungeon divers, or sometimes door smashers will be referred to as power gamers as well. These are players that want to play the game as it was written, right? So they're the players that want to get to the action. They're the players that will go immediately for the dungeon. They'll get the lore out of the way as quickly as possible. The role-playing aspect will be relatively minimum, but they will have a lot of fun enjoying the mechanics of the game, attacking, defending, using strategy and solving puzzles, and defeating as many monsters as they possibly can, doing as much damage as they possibly can. Some of them will fit in very well with competitive gamers, but some of them are also very different on a different sort of vein. So that's why I put them in two different categories. Whereas competitive gamers usually focus on some sort of meta or tournament group, door smashers will often find gimmicks or fun twists of strength that they can use to their advantage. Lesser known rules or combinations that you might not think about that may not necessarily be competitive, but in any one spot they'll do a whole heck of a lot of damage. And they'll be very proud of that. These players could be a lot of fun to see the kinds of shenanigans that they'll come up with in order to tackle a dungeon or to defeat a monster. They can be very interesting to play with, but they can also be a bit oppressive at the same time if you're not careful. Door Smashers, the ones who only want to roll the dice. Absolutely. That's exactly what I would describe them as. They like to roll the dice. They like to get the biggest numbers on those dice as possible, to do the most damage, and to come out victorious. The advantage of Door Smashers is that you get to the game very quickly with a group of Door Smashers. There's not really a whole heck of a lot of putzing around and beating around the bush. The goal is to get to the dungeon and dive into it and tackle the challenges as quickly as possible. So you get to the action, you get to the dice rolling, and that's the advantage. The disadvantage, obviously, is that you're sacrificing some of the other aspects of game. You're sacrificing some of the role-playing. You sacrifice a little bit of the other nuances of the game in order to get straight to the action. So they can be very, very fun if you're inclined to get to the action very quickly, but if you enjoy the role-playing aspect, then a group of Door Smashers may not give you what you're looking for. Finally, we have the mix of friends. And a mix of friends, I think, is the most common group when it comes to any sort of game. Whether it's a war game, whether it's a tabletop game, or whether it's a card game, you'll have a guy that's competitive, you'll have a guy that cares about the meta and every bit of news that comes out. You'll have a guy that's a great storyteller and that cares about the building and the painting aspect. You'll have a guy that's a wonderful DM but a terrible player or something like that. And they all get together and they play their games, despite their differences. Despite the different ideas that they may have about what's fun, they still have fun together because they can look past those differences and focus on the importance of being friends. I think that's very valuable. That can be very, very valuable indeed. Sometimes it is much more important to make a good long-term friend, or even a short-term friend sometimes, and get along well, be able to experience different parts of the game or personalities that you might not normally have, and roll some dice and play some games. That's what it's about. So just to summarize, casual role players are the ones that will happily develop a character and play the game and kind of enjoy all the different aspects. Competitive gamers are ones that focus on a meta, a power combinations and tournament play. Storytellers are those that will spin wonderful stories around their character or their world, but maybe focus less on the actual gameplay. And Door Smashers focus entirely on the gameplay, focusing on doing as much damage to people as possible. And a mix of friends can be a mix of all or a few of the above. Mom, son, what are you doing? Why your teacher looks like a flying lizard? Me, Mom, this is my D&D class, please. That's fantastic. It can absolutely be like that sometimes. So now let's talk about another subject that I want to spend a lot more time on, which is your creative priority. Just running down the list, these are the things I'm going to talk about. Your style, your theme, your story, your contribution, and your tolerance. Okay? When it comes to your style, it kind of comes into... I'm talking about the types of gamer. Like, are you a competitive gamer? Are you a casual role player? Are you a storyteller? What is your style? Knowing that or thinking about that will at least give you a leg up on trying to find the group that you want to play with. When it came to my introduction to Dungeons, Dragons, and Pathfinder, I didn't know what kind of gamer I was. I knew that I wanted to try this thing because a lot of my friends were having fun with it, and I wanted to see what it was like. It turns out that I started off with a group of Door Smashers. They wanted to get to the action. They didn't care about the role-playing aspect, and I get that. What I discovered was that I cared a little bit more about my character's story. And so not having an outlet to tell my story made me frustrated, right? I was young, I was foolish, and so I got a little bit frustrated that I didn't have that outlet that I was hoping to have through this gaming experience with my friends. So what I learned was to find some other people. I needed to find some other storytellers like me so that we could spin that story together. We could make all of our threads of fate come together in interesting and fascinating ways. And that's important too. Sometimes you have to spend some time with maybe one group of people to discover what you really want and value, and that's just part of the learning experience. It's completely fine to do that. Your theme. Now, this is more about the type of story that you want to tell. It's not the story that you want to tell, but it's the type of story that you want to tell. Is your theme a tragedy? Do you want to tell a story about a tragic hero or an army that's on its last legs? Do you want to tell a story about pirates or ninjas, or both, pirate ninjas? Do you want to tell a story about dragons? Do you want to tell a story about the most heroic heroes or the most villainous villains? Having an idea of the kind of themes that you want to explore will help you in developing the next point, which is your story. Is your story for your character just trying to insert yourself into a situation? Do you just want to see how would you tackle attacking a dragon or defending a castle from a horde of orcs? How would you handle being thrust into space with a limited amount of oxygen and an alien race that wants to eat your fingers? How would you react to that? Some people just want to tell that and see what they would do. Think about what they would do in a different situation or different perspective, and that's fascinating. Some people want to tell a story about a completely different person. Maybe you're a female role player and you want to tell a story about a big buff male orc. Or maybe you're normally a sports player, but you want to tell a story about a fair prince who plays music. These are the different kinds of stories that you can tell. Sorry, I got lost in theme. So let's take a step back. Theme is the overarching or larger concept, right? It's not the specific story, it's the genre of story. So for example, Harry Potter is a story about a child named Harry Potter that learns to become a wizard. But the theme of Harry Potter is high fantasy and sorcery and magic. J.K. Rowling wanted to tell a story about magic and a school of magic and a evil wizard organization, and she chose those themes in order to tell that story. So, your style feeds into your theme, feeds into your story. Let's talk about your contribution. Okay? This is, I think, the thing that many new players do not think about when they're entering a group of friends, especially when they ask a DM if they can join their group. I think a lot of new players will stop at the story part. They'll have a great story about a character that they want to introduce to a D&D campaign, or they have an army that they've built and they want to play a game with a group of new people. But what are you bringing to the table? What contribution are you making to your dungeon master and to your other players that you're with, whether they're your friends or whether they're strangers that you've never played with before? Your contribution is literally, what are people getting out of with playing with you? What's the benefit to them, I suppose? It's a crass way of putting it. It's perhaps a shallow way of putting it, but it's something to consider. If you are, and I hate to say this, because I don't think you are, you who is sitting there listening, because if you were a selfish person, you likely wouldn't be reading about this. You wouldn't be looking for advice. You'd think you know everything, right? But imagine there's a selfish person. There's a selfish person that only cares about their half-elf ranger. Their half-elf ranger is the coolest ranger in all the land. He never misses. He has a perfect Mary Jo story or Mary Sue story. Or what is it? Marty Sue and Mary Sue? I don't know. Anyway, Mary Sue story. And he wants to play his half-elf ranger, and he doesn't want anything else to do with anybody else. He doesn't care about the halfling warlock. He doesn't care about the dragonborn fighter. He doesn't care about the half-orc barbarian. He just cares about his half-elf ranger. That's it. Well, what's he bringing to the table? Why would the half-orc barbarian care about the half-elf ranger? Why would the halfling warlock care about the half-elf ranger? This half-elf ranger, this player, is focusing entirely on themselves, but not really letting the other players share their stories or their experiences. They don't care when the other players roll their dice or make their attacks. Many of these players many selfish players might be focused on their phone or ignoring the DM when he explains important plot points, unless it applies to their character specifically. So let's avoid being like that kind of person, right? So what's your contribution? Are you a humorous player? Do you like to help make people laugh or smile? Do you like to listen to other people's stories and learn more about their characters and what makes them tick? Even if you like to draw, if you like to draw your other players' characters, that could be a great way to make a good impression on the people that you're trying to play with. Your contribution is literally, how are you going to get along with the other people in your group? How are you going to make friends in a way? Sometimes doing a simple thing like buying your DM a drink or offering to go out to lunch with some of your new players could be a great way to make friends and get off to a good start with your group. I'm not saying that you need to buy lunch every time. I'm not saying that you need to flatter your DM and buy them everything that they need. No, of course not. That's not what I'm saying. But bring positivity, friendliness, and friendship to the table, and you will find that you'll get that in return. That's the important thing to take away from that. Now, the flip side is your tolerance. Oh, let's hold on. So contribution is the utility of my character in the game for my team, also as me as a person. Yes, absolutely. So it's you as a person, and it's your character not trying to hog the spotlight all the time, for example. If the only thing you care about is your character and you don't care about who you're playing with, well, then what's the motivation for anybody to care about you or your character? If that's the case, then why don't you just write your own book where your character can be the amazing person that you envision and never has to face any real challenges? It's a bit unfortunate, but unfortunately you will find people that will be very self-centered like that out there. You'll find people that will focus on that, and it's a maturity thing, right? Sometimes they'll come out of it, they'll learn what they need to learn to be more cooperative, and sometimes they don't. And that's always not the best of experiences, but let's focus on the positive, right? I think that most of the time you will find people that are eager to listen, they're eager to make friends, because sometimes being a nerd can be a lonely experience. And having friends that share your interests and that have an interest in your characters and the stories that you want to tell can be a very refreshing experience. So if you can be that friend, then you'll find that friend in others. But we have a tolerance level, right? What is your tolerance? What are you willing to put up with? Okay? If the people around you are predominantly those types that are power gamers, but you really want to tell a story, well, what's your tolerance level? Are you willing to tolerate a bit more power gaming and try to inject a little bit of your story along the way? If you're a power gamer and you're surrounded by role players that spend a lot of time trying to seduce the dragon when you would just like to kill the dragon, how much are you willing to tolerate? Are you willing to sit through a session or two of them trying to negotiate prices with a merchant when you know you could just steal the things with a high enough stealth roll and sleight of hand check? What are you willing to tolerate in terms of getting along with everyone else? Are you willing to tolerate somebody that's maybe a little bit more self-centered? Or would you rather focus on finding the ideal group of gamers? I can tell you from experience that the ideal group of gamers is rare to come across sometimes. It can be very, very rewarding if you do put in the effort and you do try to find that great group. But sometimes another person's ideal group of gamers will not include you, even if you think that you would fit in perfectly with them. And that's okay. The idea is to find the group that works with you, to find the contribution that you're willing to bring to the table and the tolerance that you're willing to express when it comes to different opinions and different gaming styles. A little bit of tolerance can go a long way, and a lot of tolerance can go a very long way, but try not to tolerate toxic or negative behavior, right? We don't want to be promoting anybody using anybody else in order to tell their story or to get favors at the table or anything like that. So take everything here with a little bit of a grain of salt. There's only so much that you should tolerate, but going and tolerating a little bit can help you get along with many more kinds of people. Okay? So, your style, your theme, your story, your contribution, and your tolerance. All of this comes into your creative priority. What is the thing that you want to tell? What is the thing that you want to experience? And are you prepared for that, I suppose. Mentally and physically. And physically will come into the purchases, right? I think this is the part that many people probably expected me to start with, but I'm ending with it because I do want to talk a little bit about these kinds of things. But at the same time, I think that this is pretty straightforward and just factual versus the wisdom that I would have to share, right? So when it comes to getting into a new game, you'll have a few things that you'll need to get into it. Whether it is a tabletop role-playing game or a war game, there are a set amount of supplies that you'll need. Now, there are ways to get things for cheaper. There are ways to get things for free. There are ways to borrow things from your allies or your friends. So I'm not saying that you must spend money. What I am saying is that these will be the things that you will need access to in order to properly engage in these games. Okay? And I'll talk a little bit about some of that as we go along. So, the very first thing is the core rulebook. The main rulebook that has the rules that you'll need to understand how the game works. In Dungeons & Dragons, it's the Player's Handbook. I believe other games will call it a Player's Guide. Other games will call it the core rulebook. I believe Warhammer 40k calls it the core rulebook based on whatever edition is current. And that will be the thing that to ask your store manager about. The shop owner or the cashier or whoever you are engaging with. Many different Discords and Reddit groups will also have this information readily on hand to share, which is, what is the first book that you need in order to start playing the game. I believe with some games, X-Wing will have a starter set. So you'll need to get the starter set that will have the core rules in it. Some games will have a starter set and also a separate book. And the starter set can be a great deal, but the separate book on its own may be a little bit more fleshed out. For example, with Dungeons & Dragons, they had a starter set that had a kind of simplified player's guide. But the full player's guide, the player's handbook, had a lot more of the advanced rules and extra options for gameplay. So keep that in mind as you're looking along the shelves and asking the store owner, the cashier, what you're looking for. You may want the starter set because it can be a really good deal, a really great, easy way to get into the game, or you may want the full book to make sure that you're not missing out on any of the particular rules, so on and so forth. Tools to play. So many games will require dice. I think that's probably the most common tool that you'll need. Let me take a drink real quick. But the type of dice that you'll need will differ from game to game. Games like X-Wing or Warcry, Underworlds or Armada, I believe... Yeah, so different games like that will have their own custom dice. Okay, they won't be a typical six-sided dice with pips. They will be dice with different symbols upon them, right? They will have X's or squares or sword symbols or spell symbols, different things that will represent the various rules of gameplay that you'll find in their respective rulebooks. Many games also get along with different types of dice. For example, Warhammer 40k primarily gets along with six-sided dice, okay? And you may need a large pack of them in order to roll enough dice for the various attacks that you'll have to make. It could be a pack of 10, it could be a pack of 20, it could be a pack of 100 dice. But, find the amount of dice that will work for you. Sometimes it can be rather appealing to have a broad collection of dice, all different colors, or maybe you want all dice to be exactly the same, to be the same color or same style. That's completely up to you. Games like Dungeons & Dragons will need a range of dice, from a 4-sided dice all the way up to a 20-sided dice. And these can be found in packs, where they're all the same color, or you'll find that some stores will sell literal dice troughs, where you can pick out whatever dice you want and then buy them as a bundle, or buy them for a quarter a piece or 10 cents a piece or something along those lines, depending on the store that you go to. There's, of course, always dice that you can get online on Amazon or eBay. There are even custom dice that you can find on Etsy and other creative selling websites. I definitely recommend taking a look at some of the creators on Etsy. Custom dice can be a real joy to play with, especially if they match your character or your army or something like that. And there's a lot out there. So, it depends on what you're looking for and what your budget is. If your budget is rather low, then maybe finding some simple Yahtzee dice will get you off to a good start so that you can start playing Warhammer. Or some very simple single color dice from your game store or card game store so that you can start playing Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder. You may also need a ruler or measuring tape. You may also need spell cards or things like that. Some of those can be listed under accessories or etc. Different things that you may need depending on the type of game that you play. And that will also lead into the miniatures. So this part can be, in a way, optional, depending on the people that you're playing with and what you want out of your game. With a game like Dungeons & Dragons, you can get along with using a dice or a token to represent your character on a grid. You can make a little origami shape if you want to. You can cut out a piece of cardboard and write your initials on it to represent your character. You can use a dice, a colorful dice that represents your character. There's many inexpensive ways to do this. One way that I've seen also is if you print out an image of your character at a small size and then fold it so that it can stand up on its own like a little standee of some kind. Lots of different ways that you can make your miniature buying experience have no cost or very little cost. But there is a great reward to having a miniature that represents your character. I personally recommend for Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder that you take a look at heroforge.com. I'm not sponsored by them. I just really love their stuff. You can customize your character to the umpteenth degree and even get a pre-colored version for your gaming uses. They have a lot of different things. I'll be sure to link that in the description below once the stream is over. Heroforge.com, I highly recommend. Now, for war games, generally it is frowned upon to use a cheaper alternative. If you come to a gaming store and you want to play a war game with your cardboard cutouts, and you're trying to play against somebody who bought all of the legitimate miniatures, you may not get a warm reception. You will likely have to spend a pretty penny in order to get the appropriate miniatures. Part of this is because of a social rule called what you see is what you get. Some games will itemize this into a full rule. It's sometimes referred to as WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. If you turn that into an acronym, it comes out as WYSIWYG. And what it means is that if you have a model on the table, it should look like what it is. Okay? So if you have a Space Marine on the table, it should represent a Space Marine. You shouldn't have a Space Marine on the table that represents an Eldar Guardian, right? Some people will be okay with you testing things using what's called proxies, right? Where you use one miniature to represent another as long as everything is clear to your opponent. There's nothing wrong with that as long as it's clear to your opponent and your opponent wants to help you test something out or play a friendly game or something like that. But generally, you will want things to look like what they are. With Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder, that's a little bit less necessary, depending on the miniatures that you have available. Sometimes, for example, if you want to play a kobold, but the only kobold that you have is one with a mining pick, but you want your kobold to be a thief with a dagger, well, that's okay. At least it's a kobold, and people can see at first glance it's a kobold, and everyone will quickly realize that's your character, and wherever it moves is where you intend to go, etc., right? But if you have the penny to spend, getting the appropriate miniature, like I said, through Hero Forge can be very, very rewarding. With war games, you'll want it. It's kind of imperative to spend that pretty penny to get the miniatures that you need to play the game appropriately. So, That means if you're playing X-Wing, using the appropriate starfighters. If you're playing Legion, using the appropriate stormtroopers or clone troopers, etc. If you're playing Warhammer, it's using the appropriate faction and the various miniatures that they have. Finally, we come to accessories. These are going to be tokens, point trackers, spell cards, many things that aren't necessary to have right off the bat, but are very, very useful to have on hand to make your gaming experience easier. Probably the most common quote-unquote accessory would be a character sheet for Dungeons & Dragons, which I think is probably rather necessary, but it can go all the way down to dice trackers and little tokens and pips that you can put around your character that maybe are not as necessary, but can help you keep track of what's happening on the table. Especially for something like Warhammer, you may want wound trackers. If you're playing Dungeons & Dragons, you may want spell cards or ability cards. That way you can see at a glance or very, very quickly what can your character do. And then you can just hand it to your DM to explain this is what I want my character to do. And that's that. You're done. Etc. So then we come to a lot of the other things that can improve your gaming experience. Some people get really, really into their characters or really, really into their gaming experience and will even go as far as to cosplay. The Dungeon Master will wear a big shiny wizard robe or a wizard hat. The players will put on pieces of armor that they've gathered at Ren fairs or at other shops or purchased off of different shop sellers online. Some people will have a lot of fun with those sorts of things, but they're definitely not necessary for your gaming experience. There are, of course, cases that you can get to help you carry your miniatures or your tools from place to place. Some people will simply use a cardboard box. Some people will use a purpose-built case for their supplies, whether it's their books. I remember an old DM that I had that had a rolling document case where she would keep a massive amount of story and quests and paperwork and all sorts of things that were entirely devoted to Dungeons & Dragons. But when she was walking down the road, she looked like a very fancy businesswoman. That was the state of her very dense briefcase. Sometimes I wondered if people would give her a funny look if she entered a store with that, like she was trying to act as some sort of high-class thief or something like that. But that's the range of items that you can get. There's lots of different carrying cases, backpacks, DM screens, and a variety of other things that you can get to enhance your gaming experience. As a DM, when I'm playing with my players in the flesh, around a physical table, I will often go to a hobby store or a craft store and find little bits and bobs that I can reward my characters with as they discover treasure. There are sellers online that you can buy wands from or potions from. There are great little pendants and other gemstones that you can find at hobby stores to make fancy magical rings or necklaces. The sky is the limit. Your imagination is the limit when it comes to that etc. Part of your gaming experience. Whew, and that's about it. That's what I've got for you. I'm going to run back through and kind of go over what we've talked about just one last time to summarize. So we talked about the game stores. We talked about the types of games, the groups, your creative priority, and finally our purchases. We talked about the different comic shops, the board game stores, card game stores, and Warhammer stores that you can find a lot of these things at, whether it's going and finding new friends to play with or finding a space for your current friends to play at, whether it's finding a new group of friends. Many of these stores also will have billboards that you can look at to find groups that are looking for more players or players that are looking for a dungeon master or something along those lines. Whoops. There we go. There's also the different types of games, from card games like Magic the Gathering and Yu-Gi-Oh! To tabletop role-playing games like D&D and Pathfinder, and war games like Warhammer and Legion and others besides. And of course, there are different I'm really trying to manage these PowerPoint slides. There's different kinds of gamers. The casual role players, the competitive gamers, the storytellers and door smashers, and the mix of friends that most people will have and be interested in. And finally, your creative priority, your style, your theme that leads into your story that you want to tell, what you bring to the table as your contribution, and what are you willing to tolerate when it comes to your group of friends or your group of players. And of course, your purchases. The first things that you'll look for when you go into that game store and look to spend your hard-earned cash on some nerdy paraphernalia, right? That's what we're looking for. I really hope that this has, let me zip on over here. I really hope that this has, helped everyone out. I'll certainly take some questions here. Now that I think, what's your opinion about each type of game? That's a great question. So my opinion is that they're all great. I think that there are a lot of really, really great games. Everything from Ascension, which is a deck building game, to Warhammer 40k, that is a very, very multifaceted hobby in and of itself. I love Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder. I have not played Starfinder, which is the sci-fi version of Pathfinder, but I'd like to at some point. I think one of the big differences that between Starfinder and something like D&D is that Starfinder likes to get into the nitty-gritty of some of the numbers, whereas D&D has become much more new player friendly, but it still has a lot of grit to it if you dive into it. But overall, it doesn't drown you with numbers right off the bat. And once you have your character sheet done, Dungeons & Dragons can be very, very easy to play. Other than that, I tend not to play card games myself. I used to when I was younger. I would play a lot of different card games depending on what was popular with my group of friends. And there's a lot of great competition that can be had. Even now, if somebody invited me to a draft, I would probably go because I think drafting is the most fun. Drafting is a card game version where everyone purchases a number of packs, right? And you sit around a table and everyone opens up a pack. And then you pick a card from that pack that you want, and then you pass the rest to the person on your right. Okay? That you keep getting passed that around, you pass that around, you pass that around until that pack is empty, and then you start again and pass it to your left. So at the end of a draft, you have a hodgepodge deck of cards. Sometimes you'll pick a card that's really rare and you want to hold on to it because you just want it for your collection later. Sometimes you pick a card because it has really pretty artwork. And sometimes you pick a card because it has the deck mechanic in mind for what you want out of the draft. And then you start playing games with that. It can be a lot of fun. I think it's really a lot of fun to play drafts with different kinds of card games. That's the most fun that I've had anyway. I have not played Legion yet, but I have played X-Wing, and I've played a little bit of Armada, and both of those are really, really fantastic games. I've heard really great things about Legion, and there's many, many other miniatures games out there well beyond that people find fascinating. Some off the top of my head are Infinity. There is Hordes, which is a fantasy game that I haven't heard much about recently, unfortunately. It's called War Machine, right? Yeah, I believe War Machine. That's kind of a mix of sci-fi and fantasy. There's a lot of just really fantastic games out there. I encourage you to look them up. Sometimes it can be down to, do you like the look of the miniatures? Do you like the style of game? Or do you like the kind of player that game attracts? Because different games will attract different kinds of players. Infinity, I've heard, is a much more competitive game, so it will attract many more competitive players. Whereas Age of Sigmar is a much more casual game and will attract many more of the storytellers and casual role players. Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder, there's just a broad variety of people that will be attracted to those kinds of games. So look around. Check out your local game stores. Of course, be mindful. We are in the middle of a pandemic currently. So be mindful of your social distancing and your mask wearing and washing your hands and stuff like that. Check your local groups. Definitely check online. Facebook is a wonderful resource for these sorts of things. There are many, many Discord channels out there. Some of them will be local to your city. Some of them will be local to your state. Some will just be focused on the game that you're looking for. There are also a variety of Reddit groups. If you are a youngster below the legal age of drinking, for example, then I recommend you get some advice from your parents first, or your guardian or whoever else looks after you before you dive into these sorts of things. So for me, believe it or not, I was adopted. So I had to check with my adoptive parents when I wanted to get into all the rage of the time when I was younger, like checkers and chess, when those games were becoming popular. So has it been as a very old dragon. But anyway, be mindful. Consider the different things that I've told you, and I wish you all the best of luck. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the stream here. It's just a nice short 1 hour stream. And I hope that you all have a lot of fun out there. There are many, many hobbies to enjoy, especially in this crazy world that we live in. There are many, many creative people out there, and I think it's wonderful when these different types of creative people interact, because then they can create something really, really amazing together. Man, you're the best. Thanks for what you tell us tonight. Now I'm able to put that book of Warhammer story on good use. I'm going to try to play with my family tomorrow. I wish you the best of luck. I hope you guys enjoy it all. And good luck out there. Yeah, that's about all I can say. Have fun and good luck. May the dice ever roll in your favor. I have plenty more things planned. I have my Pokemon Nuzlocke stream on Thursday. I don't believe I'll have time to do a stream tomorrow, but I may try to sneak in an extra stream on Saturday or Friday and Saturday as well. We'll see how well it goes, but I hope to see you all again very soon. Farewell, my friends.